The social worker's clipboard trembled in her hands as she watched the security footage. Frame by frame, timestamp by timestamp, everything my neighbors had reported was crumbling into lies. But it wasn't just the lies that made her face go pale. It was what the camera had actually captured. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Perfect suburban lawns, white picket dreams, and secrets buried under fresh mulch. I thought I knew my neighborhood. Turns out, I was living next to people who would destroy a child's life for a property value dispute. But here's what they didn't know. The judge reviewing their complaint used to be my college roommate. My name is Ella Richardson, and if you think the story ends with me apologizing to keep the peace, you've never met a mother who's been pushed too far. The morning it all started, I was in my backyard at 6:47 a.m., hanging laundry on the line while my 7-year-old daughter Madison built fairy houses out of sticks and leaves. The sun barely kissed the horizon, dew still clinging to the grass, and the only sound was Madison's whispered conversations with imaginary woodland creatures. "Mommy, do you think the fairies like purple flowers or yellow ones better?" she asked, holding up 2 dandelions she'd plucked from our intentionally wild garden. "Both, sweetheart. Fairies aren't picky about color. They care about the love you put into making their home." That's when I noticed the curtains twitching in the Anderson house next door. Not just a casual glance, but the methodical observation of someone taking notes. I'd seen it before. Margaret Anderson, 62, retired school principal with too much time and a subdivision presidency that had gone to her head like cheap wine. I waved. She disappeared. Madison continued her fairy architecture, completely unaware that her innocent play was being documented as neglectful supervision and inappropriate outdoor activities before proper daylight hours. Those would be the exact words on the CPS report filed 3 days later. By 7:15, I was making breakfast while Madison sat at the kitchen island, still in her pajamas, drawing detailed blueprints for an elaborate fairy village expansion. Scrambled eggs with cheese, whole grain toast cut into triangles, fresh strawberries arranged in a smiley face. The same breakfast I'd made every Tuesday for the past 2 years, the same breakfast that would later be described to Child Protective Services as inconsistent meal planning and failure to maintain proper nutritional schedules. "Mom, can we add a fairy library to the village today?" Madison asked between bites, yellow crayon moving across paper with the focused determination only children possess. "Of course, baby. What kind of books you think fairies like to read?" "Stories about brave little girls who aren't afraid of anything," she said, not looking up from her drawing. "And maybe some about families that stick together no matter what." I paused, butter knife hovering over toast. Children have a way of speaking prophecy without knowing it. Through the kitchen window, I could see Margaret Anderson in her yard, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing toward our house. Her husband Frank stood beside her, arms crossed, nodding like a bobblehead at whatever poison she was pouring into whoever would listen. The Andersons had moved in 18 months ago, and from day one, they'd treated our street like their personal kingdom. First, there were complaints about Madison's chalk art on our own driveway, property value concerns. Then it was our vegetable garden, against homeowner association aesthetics. Most recently, it was our evening routine of story time on the front porch, noise disturbance after 7 p.m. But this morning felt different. This morning had the weight of something final. I packed Madison's lunch with the same care I always did: turkey sandwich on whole wheat, apple slices with a note hidden inside that read, "You are braver than you believe," string cheese, and homemade chocolate chip cookies. I wrote her name on the brown paper bag in purple marker, her favorite color, and drew a small fairy next to it. "Ready for school, sunshine?" Madison bounded upstairs to get dressed, and I followed to help with the daily battle of brushing her thick, curly hair. She sat cross-legged on her bed while I worked through each section with gentle patience, the same way my grandmother had done for me 30 years ago. "Ouch, Mom, that one's tangled." "Sorry, sweetheart. Let me use some detangler." I reached for the spray bottle, the one with the homemade solution of water, coconut oil, and lavender that had taken me weeks to perfect through trial and error. This moment, this ordinary, tender moment of a mother caring for her daughter's hair, would later be twisted into evidence of inadequate grooming standards and causing unnecessary discomfort to the child during daily care routines. By 8:20, we were walking to the bus stop, Madison's backpack bouncing with each skip step, her hair now perfectly braided with the small butterfly clips she had chosen herself. Other parents stood in clusters, coffee cups steaming in the morning air, discussing weekend soccer games and upcoming school fundraisers. "Morning, Ayla," called Jennifer Walsh from across the street. "Madison's fairy garden is absolutely magical. My kids have been asking if they can come help build houses this weekend."
Of course, the more fairy architects, the merrier. Margaret Anderson stood 20 feet away, still on her phone, still staring, still documenting. The school bus rounded the corner with its familiar rumble and squeak of brakes. Madison hugged me tight, her arms strong around my waist, her head fitting perfectly under my chin. "Have an amazing day, baby girl. Remember what we talked about. You're smart, you're kind, and you're exactly who you're supposed to be." She climbed the bus steps, turned to wave through the window, and smiled that gap-toothed grin that could power a small city. I waved back until the bus disappeared around Oak Street, then walked home past neighbors who smiled and waved, and past one neighbor who was still talking urgently into her phone. At 8:47 a.m., I was back in my kitchen, cleaning breakfast dishes and planning my day. Work from home Tuesdays meant client calls, freelance writing deadlines, and the luxury of doing laundry between projects. I had exactly 17 minutes before my first conference call when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in a gray suit holding a clipboard and an official-looking folder. My stomach dropped like I'd swallowed ice. "Ms. Richardson? I'm Sarah Chen from Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you about a report we received regarding your daughter." The world tilted. The coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered against the kitchen tile, brown liquid spreading across the floor like spilled secrets. "I'm sorry, what kind of report?" She stepped inside without invitation, eyes already scanning my home with the clinical assessment of someone trained to find problems. "We received multiple complaints about your parenting practices and your daughter's welfare. I need to conduct a home investigation and interview both you and Madison." Multiple complaints. Multiple. Who filed these reports? I can't disclose that information, but I can tell you the concerns include inadequate supervision, inconsistent care routines, inappropriate living conditions, and potential neglect. I stared at her, then at my home, the home I'd spent 3 years turning into a sanctuary. Bookshelves lined with classics and picture books, artwork covering the refrigerator, a piano in the corner where Madison practiced Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star every evening, plants thriving on windowsills, the faint scent of last night's homemade bread still lingering in the air. There must be some mistake. Sarah Chen clicked her pen and began writing. "Let's start with your morning routine. What time did your daughter wake up today?" And that's when I realized that love, attention, creativity, and devotion meant nothing if someone wanted to weaponize bureaucracy against you. That's when I understood my neighbors hadn't just filed a complaint, they'd declared war. But they'd chosen the wrong mother to battle. Through the kitchen window, I could see Margaret Anderson watering plants that had been perfectly hydrated yesterday, positioning herself for the perfect view of the CPS car in my driveway. She was documenting this moment, too, probably already composing the neighborhood group text about how concerned citizens had finally taken action. What Margaret Anderson didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Judge Patricia Hawkins, family court magistrate for our county, had been my roommate at Northwestern University for 4 years. She'd held my hair while I cried over failed relationships, borrowed my clothes for job interviews, and stood beside me as maid of honor when I married Madison's father. She also knew exactly the kind of mother I was because she had watched me care for Madison from birth. She'd been there for midnight feedings, first steps, and every milestone celebration. But I wouldn't need to call Patricia. Not yet. First, I would let this process play out exactly as my neighbors intended. I would cooperate fully, document everything, and give them enough rope to hang themselves. Because sometimes the best defense is letting your enemies reveal exactly who they are. The social worker continued her questions while I cleaned up the broken mug, each fragment catching morning light like scattered promises. Outside, suburban life continued its peaceful facade, while inside, a mother prepared for the fight of her life. Madison would be home from school in 7 hours. By then, I needed to understand exactly what we were facing, and who had decided that destroying a child's sense of security was an acceptable price for whatever twisted satisfaction they sought. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off.
The curtains were still twitching next door. Let them watch. They had no idea what was coming. Sarah Chen's clipboard grew heavier with each check mark as she moved through my house like a detective hunting for evidence in a crime that didn't exist. Every room became a potential courtroom exhibit. Every choice I'd made as a mother suddenly under microscopic examination. "Can you explain why your daughter's bedroom doesn't have blackout curtains?" she asked, pen hovering over paper. I stared at Madison's window where sheer white curtains danced in the morning breeze, allowing natural light to filter through along with the painted paper butterflies she'd taped to the glass. "She likes to wake up with the sunrise. It helps regulate her sleep cycle naturally." Sarah wrote something down. I couldn't see what, but her expression suggested my answer had somehow failed a test I didn't know I was taking. "The complainants mentioned concerns about your daughter's outdoor activities. Can you walk me through her typical after-school routine?" Complainants. Plural. My chest tightened like someone was slowly turning a screw behind my ribs. "Madison comes home around 3:30. We have a snack together. She tells me about her day. Then she usually plays outside until dinner. She's building a fairy garden in the backyard. It's been her passion project for months." Unsupervised outdoor play? "I work from home. My office window faces the backyard. I can see her at all times." Another note. Another invisible failure. We moved to the kitchen, where she photographed Madison's breakfast dishes still drying in the rack, opened cabinet doors to inspect our food supplies, and asked detailed questions about meal planning that made me feel like I was defending my thesis on maternal competence. The report mentions irregular meal times and inconsistent nutrition. What report? The words came out sharper than I intended. "I'm sorry, but can you at least tell me what specific allegations have been made? I have a right to know what I'm being accused of." She flipped through her folder, scanning pages with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times. Failure to maintain appropriate sleep schedules for the child, allowing unsupervised outdoor activities in potentially dangerous conditions, inconsistent meal planning, inadequate educational support, creating an unstable living environment. Each accusation felt like a physical blow. I gripped the kitchen counter to keep from swaying. None of that is true. Madison has a consistent bedtime routine. She's an honor roll student. She's happy, healthy, and thriving. The complainants seem to disagree. They've provided detailed documentation of their observations. Documentation. I thought about Margaret Anderson's morning phone calls, the way she positioned herself to watch our every move, the deliberate timing of her yard work to coincide with our activities. Who are these complainants? They're my neighbors, aren't they? I cannot reveal that information at this time, but she didn't need to. The evidence was scattered throughout her questions, details only someone watching from the Anderson house would know. The timing of Madison's outdoor play, our breakfast routine, the fact that Madison sometimes wore pajamas past 8 a.m. on weekends. Ms. Chen, my daughter is loved, cared for, and protected. Whatever someone has told you, it's not the truth. She looked up from her notes with eyes that held professional sympathy, but bureaucratic distance. I'm sure you believe that, Ms. Richardson, but my job is to investigate all reports thoroughly and objectively. The doorbell rang again. Through the window, I saw Jennifer Walsh from across the street, holding a casserole dish and wearing the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. I should take this. Actually, I'd like to observe your interactions with neighbors. It's part of the assessment. My face burned as I opened the door, knowing that every word would be analyzed and interpreted through the lens of suspicion. Hi, Ella. Jennifer's voice was carefully neutral. I brought you some lasagna. I thought, well, with everything happening, you might not feel like cooking tonight. Is everything happening? I kept my voice light, but Jennifer's eyes darted past me to Sarah Chen, who was watching from the kitchen doorway. The whole neighborhood is talking about the CPS car in your driveway. Margaret Anderson sent a group text this morning saying she finally took action about the situation next door. My heart stopped. What? Jennifer lowered her voice. She's been building a case against you for months, Ella. Documenting everything, getting other neighbors to report what she calls concerning behaviors. She's convinced Frank Morrison and the Petersons to file complaints too. 3 households, 3 separate reports, all orchestrated by one woman who decided my parenting didn't meet her standards. What behaviors? What have I supposedly done wrong? She says you let Madison play outside too early in the morning, that you don't dress her properly for the weather, that you're too lenient about bedtimes and homework. She's been taking photos of your house, timing your activities, even recording conversations from her backyard when you and Madison are on the porch. The room spun. I gripped the doorframe as the full scope of the surveillance hit me. Margaret Anderson hadn't just been a nosy neighbor. She'd been conducting a systematic campaign to destroy my family.
Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Jennifer glanced at Sarah Chen again, then stepped closer. She wants you gone, Ella. She thinks you're bringing down property values with your alternative lifestyle choices. The fairy garden, the organic vegetables, letting Madison be creative instead of structured. She's been poisoning people against you, saying you're an unfit mother who doesn't deserve to live in a respectable neighborhood. Sarah Chen stepped forward. Ma'am, I'll need to speak with you as well. Are you willing to provide a statement about your observations of Ms. Richardson's parenting? Jennifer straightened and something shifted in her expression. My observations? I observe a mother who bakes homemade bread every week and shares it with the whole street. I observe a little girl who says please and thank you, helps elderly neighbors with their groceries, and creates beautiful art that she gives away freely. I observe a bedtime story on the front porch that my own children ask to listen to because they're magical and educational. She turned to face me fully. I observe a parent who shows up to every school event, volunteers for field trips, and raises a child who other kids gravitate toward because she's kind and imaginative. If that's what Margaret Anderson calls unfit parenting, then she's the one with the problem. Sarah wrote furiously, and I saw something change in her posture. For the first time since arriving, she looked uncertain. Thank you, I whispered to Jennifer. There's more you should know. Margaret tried to get the Homeowners Association to file a complaint against you, too. She wanted to force you to remove the fairy garden and replant with approved landscaping. When the board refused, she started this CPS campaign.
The pieces clicked together like a puzzle I never wanted to solve. This wasn't about child welfare. It was about control. Margaret Anderson had decided I didn't belong in her vision of suburban perfection, and when legal channels failed, she'd weaponized the system designed to protect children. Has she done this before? I asked. Jennifer nodded grimly. The family who lived in your house before you, they had teenage boys who skateboarded in their driveway. Margaret filed noise complaints, called the police about loitering, and eventually made their lives so miserable they sold and moved across town. She's been bragging about cleaning up the neighborhood ever since you moved in. My phone buzzed. A text from Madison's school. Madison seems distressed today. She mentioned people asking questions about her home life. Please call when convenient. My 7-year-old daughter was being interrogated at school about our family. The invasion wasn't limited to our home. It was following her into the one place where she should feel safe and supported. I need to pick up Madison, I said. Sarah Chen shook her head. I'm not finished with my assessment, and I'll need to interview Madison this afternoon to get her perspective on the home environment. You want to question my 7-year-old daughter? It's standard procedure. Children often reveal information that parents overlook. The clinical way she said it made my skin crawl. Madison would come home expecting hugs and snacks and fairy garden expansion plans, only to be subjected to questions designed to uncover problems that didn't exist. She doesn't know about any of this, I said. She doesn't know that strangers have been watching her, judging her play, turning her innocent activities into evidence against me. She's going to be terrified. Children are more resilient than parents think, and if there's nothing to hide, she'll confirm your account of the home environment. If there's nothing to hide. The phrase hung in the air like an accusation disguised as reassurance. Jennifer squeezed my shoulder. I'll call Tom Bradley. He's the attorney who helped us with our property dispute last year. This isn't right, Ella. Madison is one of the happiest kids I know. After Jennifer left, Sarah Chen continued her investigation. She measured the height of cabinet locks, examined the contents of our medicine cabinet, tested the temperature of our water, and asked increasingly invasive questions about Madison's development, social interactions, and emotional state. Does Madison ever express fear about coming home? No. Home is her safe space. Has she ever mentioned feeling unsafe or unsupervised? Never. She knows she's loved and protected. Do you ever leave her alone in the house? Not for more than a few minutes, and only to get mail or take out trash. She's always within shouting distance. Each question felt like a trap. Each honest answer could be twisted into evidence of negligence by people who'd never witnessed our daily reality, but were suddenly experts on our family dynamics. At 3:15, I stood at my front window, watching for the school bus while Sarah Chen finished photographing Madison's bedroom. Outside, Margaret Anderson was pruning roses that didn't need pruning, positioning herself for the perfect view of whatever drama would unfold when my daughter came home to find a stranger questioning her about the only life she'd ever known. The yellow bus rounded the corner, and my heart broke a little as Madison bounced down the steps with her usual enthusiasm, completely unaware that her world had been turned upside down by adults who decided her happiness was less important than their suburban aesthetics. She ran up the driveway with her backpack flying behind her, fairy garden expansion plans probably, dancing in her head, ready to share stories about her day with the mother who had apparently been deemed unworthy of raising her.
"Mommy," she called, bursting through the front door. "I learned about butterfly life cycles today, and Mrs. Garcia said we can hatch caterpillars in class next month. And Tommy Henderson asked if he could come see our fairy garden because his mom said it's better than Disney World." She stopped short when she saw Sarah Chen emerge from the kitchen, clipboard in hand, professional smile masking the interrogation that was about to begin. "Madison, sweetie," I said, kneeling to her level. "This is Miss Chen. She's here to talk to us about our family."
My daughter's smile faltered as she sensed the tension crackling through our home like electricity before a storm. And in that moment, I realized Margaret Anderson hadn't just attacked my parenting, she'd stolen my daughter's innocence, forcing a 7-year-old to defend the love that should never need justification. Madison sat cross-legged on our living room carpet, a coloring book open to a page of dancing unicorns, while Sarah Chen positioned herself across from us like a prosecutor preparing for trial. The afternoon light streaming through our windows felt different now, contaminated by the knowledge that every moment of our lives had been scrutinized and twisted into weapons. "Madison, can you tell me about your morning routine?" Sarah's voice carried that artificially sweet tone adults use when they're trying to extract information from children. My daughter looked up from her purple crayon, confusion flickering across her face. "Like, how do I brush my teeth?" "Sure, let's start there. What time do you wake up every day?" Madison glanced at me, sensing the weight behind the simple question. I nodded encouragingly, though my stomach churned with the knowledge that her innocent answers would be dissected for signs of neglect. "I wake up when the sun comes through my butterfly curtains. Mommy says my body has a natural clock that knows when it's time to get up." Sarah wrote this down. I wondered how she would phrase it. "Child demonstrates inconsistent sleep schedule," or "parent fails to maintain structured wake times." "And then what happens?" "I go potty, brush my teeth, and come downstairs. Mommy always has breakfast ready, and we talk about what I'm excited about for the day. Today, I was excited about showing my teacher the fairy house blueprints I drew last night." "Does your mom ever make you do things you don't want to do?" The question hit like ice water. Madison's crayon paused mid-stroke as she considered this adult concept being thrust into her 7-year-old world. "Like what? Like chores, or going to bed when you want to stay up, or eating foods you don't like?" "Madison," giggled, the sound of a child who couldn't fathom why anyone would ask such obvious questions. "Of course, that's what moms do. But she explains why things are important, and she makes everything fun. Like, when we clean my room, we pretend we're archaeologists discovering buried treasure." Sarah's pen scratched across paper. "What happens when you don't want to do what your mom asks?" "We talk about it. Sometimes she changes her mind if I have a good reason. Like, last week, I didn't want to wear my rain boots to school because they're not as pretty as my sneakers, but then Mommy showed me the weather app and explained that my feet would get wet and cold and I might get sick. So I chose the rain boots myself." "Has your mom ever yelled at you or punished you?" Her face scrunched in concentration. "She uses her serious voice sometimes, like when I almost touched the hot stove. But she explained that she was scared I might get hurt, not mad at me. And when I broke her favorite coffee mug last month, I thought she'd be really angry. But she just hugged me and said accidents happen." Each answer was a small victory, but I could see Sarah searching for cracks in our foundation. The trained eye of someone who'd seen real abuse, looking for signs that simply weren't there. "Tell me about your fairy garden, Madison." My daughter's entire face lit up. "Oh, it's the most amazing project ever. I'm building a whole fairy village in our backyard. There's already 3 houses, a library, a school, and a marketplace. Next, I want to add a fairy hospital because even magical creatures need health care." "Do you build these alone?" "Sometimes, but Mommy helps when I need her, and she brings me snacks and drinks so I don't get too hungry or thirsty while I work, and she takes pictures of my progress so I can see how much I've accomplished." "How long do you usually play outside by yourself?" "I'm not by myself. Mommy can see me from her office window. She waves at me, and sometimes she comes out to admire what I've built or to suggest new ideas. Remember when you helped me figure out how to make the fairy library waterproof using that special clear coating?" "I remember. You were so proud when it survived that thunderstorm." Sarah made more notes.
Madison, do you ever feel scared at home? Scared? Why would I feel scared at home? Home is where Mommy keeps me safe. What about at night? Do you sleep well? I have the best dreams, and if I ever have a nightmare, Mommy lets me come to her room and we make up better stories until I fall asleep again. The interrogation continued for another 20 minutes. Questions about discipline, about freedom, about fear, about hunger, every possible angle that might reveal dysfunction in our perfectly functional family. Madison answered each one with the honest confidence of a child who'd never doubted her security. Finally, Sarah closed her notebook. "Thank you, Madison. You can go back to your coloring now." Madison beamed and returned to her unicorns, humming softly to herself, blissfully unaware that she'd just defended our entire way of life against accusations that could tear us apart. Sarah stood and motioned for me to follow her into the kitchen, out of Madison's earshot. "Your daughter seems well-adjusted," she admitted quietly. "Because she is. Because despite what my neighbors have told you, I'm a good mother who loves her child. The thing is, Ms. Richardson, the complaints we received were very detailed. Specific dates, times, alleged incidents. Someone has been watching your family very closely. Someone has been stalking my family. There's a difference between concern and obsession." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through what looked like a lengthy email. "According to the complainants, on October 3rd, you allowed Madison to play outside at 6:30 a.m. in inadequate clothing. On October 7th, she was observed eating breakfast while still in pajamas at 8:15 a.m. On October 12th, you failed to supervise her outdoor activities for over an hour."
Let me guess, someone provided photographic evidence? Extensive documentation, time-stamped photos, video recordings, detailed logs of your daily activities. The full scope of the violation hit me like a physical blow. Margaret Anderson hadn't just been watching. She'd been building a case file on my family like we were suspects in a crime that existed only in her twisted perception of proper parenting. "Miss Chen, do you have children?" She hesitated. "I have a 4-year-old son." "Have you ever let him play outside in his pajamas on a Saturday morning? Have you ever given him breakfast while he was still in his sleepwear? Have you ever let him build something with his own hands while you watched from a window?" Her silence was enough. "Then you understand that what my neighbors have documented isn't neglect, it's childhood. It's the normal, healthy, loving experience of being 7 years old with a mother who prioritizes joy over judgment." Sarah tucked her phone away. "The investigation is ongoing. I'll need to conduct follow-up interviews with Madison's teachers, your pediatrician, and other community members who interact with your family." "How long will this take?" "It depends on what we find. If everything checks out, the case will be closed within 2 weeks. If there are concerns—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung between us like a threat. If there are concerns, Madison could be removed from the only home she'd ever known, placed in foster care while bureaucrats decided whether a mother who made breakfast smiley faces and encouraged fairy garden construction was fit to raise her own daughter. After Sarah left, I stood at my kitchen sink, hands shaking as I washed the same coffee mug 3 times. Through the window, I could see Margaret Anderson in her backyard, pruning a hedge that was already perfectly manicured, positioning herself to document whatever happened next. Madison appeared beside me, tugging at my shirt. "Mommy, why did that lady ask so many questions about our family?" I knelt down to her level, searching for words that would preserve her innocence while preparing her for the battle ahead. "Sometimes adults want to make sure children are happy and safe. She was checking to see that you're loved and cared for." "But why? Can't she see that you're the best mommy in the whole world?" The simple faith in her voice nearly broke me. Not everyone understands that families can be different and still be perfect. "Are we in trouble?"
No, sweetheart, we're not in trouble. But some people think our way of doing things is wrong because it's not the same as their way. She considered this with the serious expression she wore when puzzling through complex fairy garden engineering problems. That's silly. There are lots of ways to build fairy houses, and they're all beautiful if you put love into them. You're absolutely right. That evening, after Madison was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and began documenting everything I could remember about Anderson's surveillance. Every time I'd caught Margaret watching, every complaint she'd made to the homeowners association, every interaction that had felt off or invasive. But documentation wouldn't be enough. Sarah Chen had made it clear that the investigation would expand beyond our home. Madison's teachers would be questioned. Her pediatrician would be contacted. Other parents would be asked to evaluate my fitness as a mother based on playground interactions and school pickup observations. The Andersons had weaponized an entire system against us, and playing defense wouldn't win this war. I opened my laptop and began researching harassment laws, tenant rights, and false reporting penalties. If Margaret Anderson wanted to destroy my family with lies and surveillance, she'd picked the wrong mother to manipulate. Because here's what she didn't know about me, what none of them knew. Before Madison was born, before I became the neighborhood anomaly with the organic garden and the fairy building daughter, I was Ella Richardson, summa cum laude graduate of Northwestern University with a degree in investigative journalism. I knew how to research. I knew how to gather evidence. I knew how to build an airtight case. And I was about to use every skill I had ever learned to protect the most important story of my life. The story of a little girl who deserved to grow up believing that love was enough, that creativity mattered, and that home was the safest place in the world. Margaret Anderson had made one critical error in her campaign against us. She had forgotten that mothers don't just protect their children from physical danger, they protect them from people who try to kill their spirits. The fairy lights Madison and I had strung around her bedroom window twinkled in the darkness as I worked, casting rainbow shadows across legal documents and research printouts. Somewhere across the neighborhood, my enemies slept peacefully, convinced they'd won the first battle. They had no idea the war was just beginning. At 11:47 p.m., I found exactly what I'd been looking for, a precedent case involving false reporting, harassment, and malicious use of child protective services. The family had not only won their case, but had successfully sued their accusers for damages totaling $50,000. I printed the entire file. Tomorrow, the real investigation will begin. Not into my parenting, but into theirs. Not into Madison's welfare, but into the psychological profile of adults who would traumatize a child to satisfy their need for control. Margaret Anderson wanted documentation. She was about to get more documentation than she ever imagined possible. The fairy garden glittered with dew in the moonlight. Madison's innocent construction about to become the centerpiece of a legal battle that would expose exactly who belonged in this neighborhood and who needed to find somewhere else to spread their poison. Something inside me had crystallized during those invasive questions, during the violation of our privacy, during the moment my 7-year-old daughter was forced to defend the love that should never need defending. Not anger, though anger was there. Not fear, though fear lived in my chest like a caged bird. Determination, cold, clear, and absolutely unshakable. They'd started this fight thinking I was weak, thinking I would crumble under scrutiny, thinking I would pack up and move away like the family before us. Instead, I was about to show them what happened when you threatened a mother who had spent 7 years learning that her child's happiness was worth any battle, any sacrifice, any consequence. The curtains were still twitching in the Anderson house. Let them watch. They were about to see something they'd never forget.
The call came at 7:42 a.m. while Madison was upstairs getting dressed for school.
Dr. Patricia Hawkins' voice on the other end of my phone carried the warm familiarity of 20 years of friendship, but underneath lurked something I'd never heard before. Professional concern mixed with barely contained fury. Ella, I just received the most disturbing case file that's ever crossed my desk. Someone filed a CPS complaint against you? My college roommate, my maid of honor, the woman who'd held Madison as a newborn and declared her the most perfect baby she'd ever seen, was now reviewing my family's case as the presiding judge in family court. Patricia, I can explain. You don't need to explain anything to me. I've known you for 2 decades, and I've watched you parent Madison since the day she was born. But Ella, this file? Whoever compiled this evidence has been stalking your family for months. I sank into my kitchen chair, phone pressed against my ear like a lifeline. It's my neighbors, the Andersons. They've been documenting everything we do and twisting it into evidence of neglect. I can see that. Time-stamped photographs of Madison playing in your backyard, video recordings of bedtime stories on your front porch, detailed logs of your daily routines. This level of surveillance is beyond concerning. It's harassment. Through my kitchen window, I could see Margaret Anderson watering plants that were already drowning, positioning herself for the perfect view of whatever drama might unfold this morning. Patricia, they're trying to destroy us because I won't conform to their idea of suburban perfection. My fairy garden offends them. Madison's creativity threatens them. They want us gone. I've reviewed the CPS investigators' preliminary findings. Sarah Chen noted that Madison appeared happy, healthy, and well-adjusted. Your home environment showed no signs of neglect or abuse. But Ella, this case is going to trial. My blood turned to ice. Trial? She shook her head. The complainants are pushing for a formal hearing. They've hired an attorney and are demanding a full custody evaluation. They're not backing down. Madison bounded downstairs, backpack flying, hair in 2 perfect braids adorned with tiny butterfly clips. She kissed my cheek and grabbed her lunch bag, completely unaware that adults were waging war over her right to be raised by the only mother she'd ever known. Have the best day, sunshine, I whispered, holding her tight. After the school bus disappeared around the corner, I called in sick to work and drove straight to the courthouse. Patricia met me in her chambers, still wearing her black robes, case files spread across her desk like battle plans. Show me everything, I said. She opened the Anderson file, photo after photo of Madison's innocent activities, each one captioned with accusations that made my skin crawl. October 3rd, 6:30 a.m. Subject allows minor children to play outdoors in inadequate clothing during unsafe morning hours. The photo showed Madison in her pajamas and rain boots collecting dewdrops in a jar for her fairy garden science experiment. October 7th, 8:15 a.m. Subject demonstrates inconsistent care routines, allowing child to consume meals while improperly dressed. Madison eats heart-shaped pancakes while still in her unicorn nightgown, syrup on her cheeks, pure joy radiating from her smile. October 12th, 2:47 p.m. Subject fails to provide adequate supervision during outdoor activities lasting 73 minutes. A long-distance shot of Madison constructing an elaborate fairy marketplace while I worked at my desk by the window, checking on her every few minutes. Patricia, this is insane. They're describing normal childhood moments as evidence of abuse. It gets worse. She flipped to another section. They've hired Dr. Marcus Webb, a child psychologist who specializes in testifying for custody cases. He's prepared to argue that your permissive parenting style is detrimental to Madison's development. Based on what? He's never met her. Based on their documentation and their interpretation of what constitutes proper child rearing. I studied the photos more carefully, noting the angles, the timestamps, and the calculated precision of each shot. Patricia, look at these carefully. Every single photo was taken from the Anderson property. They had to use telephoto lenses to get some of these shots.
This isn't concerned neighbors reporting suspicious activity. This is systematic stalking. She leaned forward, examining the evidence with fresh eyes. You're right. The angles are all consistent with being photographed from their upstairs windows or backyard positions. And look at the timestamps. They've been documenting our routine for months, learning our schedule, waiting for moments they could twist into something sinister.
Patricia made notes in the margins. This could be evidence of harassment rather than legitimate concern for child welfare. There's more. I pulled out my own folder, the result of 3 days of investigative work that had reminded me why I'd loved journalism before motherhood became my full-time career. I researched Anderson's history. Guess what I found? Tell me. They've done this before. In their previous neighborhood in Denver, they filed complaints against a single father who worked night shifts, accused him of leaving his teenage sons unsupervised. The case was thrown out, but the family moved anyway because of the harassment. Patricia's eyebrows raised. Do you have documentation? Court records, testimonies from other neighbors who described Anderson's behavior as obsessive and vindictive? They have a pattern, Patricia. They target families that don't fit their narrow definition of acceptable, then use official channels to drive them away. What else? I spread out property records, HOA meeting minutes, and complaint logs. They tried to force the previous owners of my house to move by filing noise complaints about teenage skateboarding. When that didn't work, Margaret Anderson ran for HOA president specifically to change the rules about appropriate outdoor activities. She lost the election? Unanimously. The other board members called her proposals draconian and punitive. That's when they escalated CPS complaints against us. Patricia studied the timeline I'd created. This shows premeditation. They didn't stumble across concerning behavior. They went hunting for evidence to support predetermined conclusions. And I found something else. I pulled out the most damaging piece of evidence, a screenshot from Margaret Anderson's Facebook page posted 2 months ago. Read this status update. Patricia read aloud. Some people shouldn't be allowed to have children. Just because you can reproduce doesn't mean you should. Watching certain neighbors makes me sick. Thank God there are ways to protect innocent children from parents who prioritize their own selfish desires over proper child rearing. Posted September 15th, 2 weeks before their first CPS complaint. This is premeditated harassment disguised as child welfare concern, Patricia concluded. But Ella, I can't preside over this case. Our friendship creates a conflict of interest. My heart sank. So they win. No. Judge Robert Martinez will handle the hearing, but I can do something else. She reached for her phone. I can refer this case to the district attorney's office for investigation of false reporting and harassment charges against the Andersons. You can do that? When someone files false reports with Child Protective Services, it's not just harassment, it's a felony. They're abusing a system designed to protect children, wasting taxpayer resources, and traumatizing innocent families. She dialed an extension. David, it's Patricia Hawkins. I need to discuss a case that involves potential criminal harassment. Yes, false CPS reporting, multiple complainants, systematic documentation, prior history of similar behavior. While Patricia spoke with the prosecutor, I studied Anderson's surveillance photos one more time. Each image told a story of a happy, healthy child living an ordinary life with an attentive mother. But in their hands, these moments of joy had been weaponized into evidence of inadequacy. Madison building fairy houses became unsupervised exposure to potential dangers. Madison eating breakfast in pajamas became inadequate care routines. Madison playing freely in our backyard became negligent supervision. They'd taken every beautiful moment of our life and poisoned it with their twisted interpretation of proper parenting. The DA wants to see you this afternoon, Patricia said, hanging up. David Morrison is handling the case personally. He's particularly interested in the pattern of behavior you've documented. That afternoon, I sat in David Morrison's office with files spread out across his conference table like evidence in a criminal trial, because that's exactly what this had become. Miss Richardson, what the Andersons have done goes far beyond neighbor disputes. Filing false reports with CPS is a Class C felony. Harassing using official channels carries additional penalties. And if we can prove this was racially or economically motivated,
It wasn't racial. It was about conformity. They couldn't tolerate a parenting style that didn't match their rigid expectations. The pattern of behavior you've documented suggests systematic harassment. The Facebook posts show premeditation. The photographic evidence proves stalking behavior. He reviewed my timeline. This is prosecutable. What happens now? We investigate them while they're trying to destroy you. We examine their financial records, interview their previous neighbors, subpoena their electronic communications. If they want to play with official systems, they're about to learn how those systems work when turned against people who abuse them. My phone buzzed. A text from Madison's teacher. Madison mentioned that people are asking questions about her family again. She seems anxious. Is everything okay? The war my neighbors had started was following my daughter into her classroom, stealing her sense of security piece by piece. Mr. Morrison, how long will this take? The criminal investigation? Several weeks. But I can expedite a restraining order to stop their surveillance immediately. And I can file an emergency motion to dismiss the custody case based on prosecutorial concerns about false reporting.
Hope flickered in my chest for the first time in days. Can you stop the trial? I can request that Judge Martinez postpone it pending the criminal investigation. When complainants are under investigation for false reporting, it calls their credibility into serious question. I left the DA's office with something I hadn't possessed since this nightmare began, a strategy that didn't involve defending my love for Madison, but instead exposed the people trying to destroy us. That evening, while Madison worked on her fairy garden expansion plans at the kitchen table, I prepared for the next phase of battle. The Andersons had spent months building their case against me. Now it was my turn to build a case against them. I started with their digital footprint, social media posts revealing their obsession with neighborhood standards, online reviews where they'd complained about local businesses that didn't meet their expectations, property records showing their pattern of moving when neighbors didn't conform to their preferences. Then I researched their allies, the other families they'd convinced to file complaints. Frank Morrison turned out to be Margaret Anderson's cousin, relocated from Denver specifically to help with their harassment campaign. The Petersons had filed for bankruptcy 6 months ago and were desperate to maintain property values. By 10 p.m., I had compiled a 47-page dossier documenting Anderson's systematic campaign against my family, their history of targeting nonconformist neighbors, and their abuse of official channels to achieve personal vendettas. The doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Sarah Chen standing on my porch, folder in hand, expression grim. "Miss Chen, is everything okay?" She stepped inside, glancing around nervously. "Miss Richardson, I need to inform you that the CPS investigation is being suspended." Suspended? The district attorney's office contacted my supervisor this afternoon. There are concerns about the validity of the complaints against you. Criminal charges are being filed against the complainants for false reporting. Relief flooded through me like warm sunshine. What does this mean for Madison and me? The case against you is closed. No further investigation required. Your daughter is not at risk, and there are no restrictions on your parenting. She paused. Miss Richardson, in 15 years of child protection work, I've never seen documentation as extensive or as calculated as what was filed against you. Someone spent months building a case based entirely on twisted interpretations of normal family life. The Andersons? I can't discuss ongoing criminal investigations, but I can tell you that your family will not be bothered by CPS again regarding these complaints. After Sarah left, I went upstairs to check on Madison. She was fast asleep, arms wrapped around her favorite stuffed unicorn, fairy garden blueprints spread across her nightstand like dreams waiting to be built. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "You're safe, baby girl. No one is ever going to take you away from me." The next morning, I watched from my kitchen window as police officers knocked on Anderson's door. Margaret Anderson answered in her bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, expecting another ordinary suburban morning. Instead, she got Detective Lisa Park reading her rights while neighbors gathered on their lawns to witness the arrest of the woman who had appointed herself judge and jury of our quiet street. The surveillance was over. The documentation had backfired. The case they'd built against me had become evidence of their own criminal behavior. Madison skipped down the stairs, ready for school, completely unaware that her normal, beautiful, chaotic childhood had just been legally validated by the same system that had nearly destroyed it. "Mommy, can we add a fairy courthouse to the garden today? I think the fairy community needs a place to solve problems fairly." "That's a perfect idea, Sunshine. Justice should always have a place in every community." Through the window, I watched Margaret Anderson being led to a police car in handcuffs, her husband Frank following with his own escort. The fairy garden glittered in the morning sun, waiting for new construction from a little girl whose innocence had survived an adult war she never understood. Sometimes the best justice is simply letting truth speak louder than lies. The local news van pulled up to our curb at 6:15 p.m., just as Madison and I were watering her newly expanded fairy courthouse. The reporter, Amanda Sterling from Channel 7, stepped out with her cameraman, both of them careful not to trample the delicate fairy village that had unknowingly become the centerpiece of a criminal harassment case. "Miss Richardson, I'm Amanda Sterling. We'd like to discuss the charges filed against your neighbors today." Madison looked up from her tiny fairy gavel made of twigs and acorns. "Are we going to be on TV, Mommy?" "Maybe, sweetheart. These people want to tell our story to help other families." The interview took place on our front porch, the same porch where Margaret Anderson had documented our bedtime stories as evidence of noise violations. Now those story sessions would be featured on the evening news as examples of loving parental engagement. "Miss Richardson, can you walk us through what your neighbors accused you of?" I glanced at Madison, who was busy arranging fairy furniture inside the courthouse while half listening to our conversation. "They turned normal parenting moments into evidence of neglect. They photographed my daughter playing outside, eating breakfast, being creative and happy. Then they twisted those beautiful moments into proof that I was unfit to raise her. The district attorney's office says they have evidence of systematic harassment. What did that look like from your perspective?" "Months of surveillance, photographs taken with telephoto lenses, detailed logs of our doily activities. They were documenting our lives like we were suspects in a crime that existed only in their imagination." Amanda leaned forward. "What motivated this level of scrutiny?" "They wanted us to conform to their vision of suburban perfection. When we wouldn't change our parenting style to match their expectations, they tried to use the legal system to force us out." Madison piped up from her fairy construction site. "Mommy, should I tell them about how the fairy court works? They believe in truth and kindness, not being mean to families who are different." The cameraman smiled and adjusted his angle to include Madison's innocent perspective on justice. "Sometimes children understand fairness better than adults." "Madison, what do you think about all this attention?" Amanda asked gently. "I think grown-ups sometimes forget that there are lots of ways to build fairy houses, and they're all beautiful if you put love into them. Maybe some people just forgot about love." That soundbite would play on every news station in the city for the next 3 days. The story aired at 11 p.m. By midnight, it had been picked up by state networks. By morning, Madison's simple wisdom about love and acceptance was trending on social media across the country. My phone started ringing at 5:47 a.m. The first call was from my sister in California. "Ella, I just saw the news story. I can't believe what those horrible people put you and Madison through." Then my college sorority sisters started calling, former colleagues from my journalism days, parents from Madison's school, people I hadn't spoken to in years who wanted to express their outrage and support. But it was the strangers who affected me most. Parents who'd been targeted by vindictive neighbors, families who'd been reported to CPS by people with personal vendettas, single mothers, working fathers, adoptive families, blended families, all sharing stories of being judged, documented, and harassed for parenting styles that didn't match someone else's narrow definition of acceptable. By Wednesday morning, the story had gone national.
Good Morning America wanted an interview. The Today Show requested a live segment. Parenting magazines asked for exclusive features. Ms. Richardson, this is Dr. Sarah Martinez from the Children's Defense League. We'd like to invite you to testify at a congressional hearing about the misuse of Child Protective Services. Congressional testimony! Me, a single mother who just wanted to raise her daughter in peace, being asked to speak to lawmakers about systemic problems in child welfare reporting? I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified. Ma'am, you've done something most families can't. You fought back against false reporting and won. Your case could prevent other families from going through this trauma. The hearing was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, interview requests kept pouring in. Documentaries wanted to feature our story. Legal advocacy groups wanted my permission to use our case as precedent for harassment legislation. Madison adapted to the attention with the resilience that only 7-year-olds possess. She explained fairy garden construction techniques to news crews with the same enthusiasm she'd shown before becoming accidentally famous. To her, these were just more adults who appreciated her creativity.
But not all the attention was positive. Thursday afternoon, I found a handwritten note tucked under our doormat. You destroyed a good family with your lies. Some people shouldn't be allowed to have children. The handwriting was shaky, angry, written by someone who'd followed our story and somehow decided that the Andersons were the real victims. I called Detective Park immediately. We've had several reports of threatening communications, she informed me. Apparently, Margaret Anderson has been giving interviews to anyone who will listen, claiming she's being persecuted for trying to protect a child. She's still talking to media? Her lawyer advised against it, but she's desperate to control the narrative. She's painted herself as a concerned neighbor who was just looking out for Madison's welfare. That evening, I watched Margaret Anderson on a local talk show wearing pearls and a navy blazer, speaking in the concerned tone of someone who believed her own lies. I never intended to hurt that family, she said, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. I was simply concerned about a little girl who seemed to be unsupervised at unusual hours. The host, clearly skeptical, leaned forward. Mrs. Anderson, you're accused of taking hundreds of photographs of this family over several months. That goes far beyond casual concern. I documented what I observed to protect myself legally. If something had happened to that child, I wanted proof that I'd tried to help. But nothing was happening to the child. CPS found no evidence of neglect or abuse. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. CPS investigators can be fooled by manipulative parents. Just because they couldn't see the problems doesn't mean they didn't exist. I turned off the television, disgusted by her refusal to acknowledge the truth, even when facing criminal charges. Madison looked up from her coloring book. Mommy, why is that lady still saying mean things about us? Sometimes when people do wrong things, they can't admit it because that would mean facing how much hurt they've caused. That's sad. In the fairy court, when someone does something wrong, they apologize and try to make it better. That's because fairies are wiser than some grown-ups. Friday morning brought the most significant call yet. Tom Bradley, the attorney Jennifer Walsh had recommended, contacted me about a civil lawsuit. Ella, you have grounds for a substantial harassment and defamation case against the Andersons and their co-conspirators. False imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, invasion of privacy, defamation. The list of actionable offenses is extensive. I'm not interested in revenge, Tom. I just want them to leave us alone. This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. What they did to you, they'll do to other families unless there are serious consequences. He was right. Margaret Anderson's television appearance proved she hadn't learned anything from her arrest. She still believed she was justified in her harassment campaign. What kind of damages are we talking about? Based on similar cases, potentially 6 figures. Documentation costs, legal fees, emotional distress, damage to reputation, lost work time, it adds up quickly. I thought about all the parents who'd called me, sharing their own stories of harassment and false reporting. How many families had been destroyed because they didn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back?
Let's do it. The civil lawsuit was filed the following Monday. By Tuesday, it was front-page news in our local paper. Family sues neighbors for $250,000 over false CPS reports. The amount wasn't about money. It was about sending a message that using Child Protective Services as a weapon against innocent families would cost more than people were willing to pay. Margaret Anderson's response was swift and predictable. Another television interview, this time with tears. They're trying to bankrupt us for caring about a child's welfare. This lawsuit proves they never cared about their daughter. They just want revenge against neighbors who dared to speak up. But the public wasn't buying it anymore. Social media comments were overwhelmingly supportive of our lawsuit. Good. These people need to face consequences for abusing the system. Hope other families sue when neighbors harass them. This behavior needs to stop. That poor little girl almost lost her mom because of these vindictive people. The Andersons' adult children began distancing themselves publicly. Their son posted on Facebook, "I don't support or condone my parents' actions. Harassing innocent families is wrong regardless of motivation." Their daughter changed her last name on all social media accounts and moved across the country to avoid association with the scandal. By the second week, protest signs appeared in our neighborhood. "We stand with Ella and Madison, love not judgment, protect families from harassment." The HOA held an emergency meeting to discuss recent events affecting neighborhood harmony. 43 residents attended, the highest turnout in the subdivision's history.
Jennifer Walsh stood up first. "I want to say publicly that Ella Richardson is an exemplary neighbor and mother. What the Andersons did was systematic harassment disguised as concern." Other neighbors shared their own experiences with Margaret Anderson's controlling behavior. Complaints about Halloween decorations that were too elaborate. Criticism of children's sidewalk chalk art. Demands that dog owners change their walking routes because she didn't approve of certain breeds. "She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for 2 years," said Mrs. Chen from Maple Street. "We were all too afraid to speak up because we didn't want to become her next target." The HOA voted unanimously to censure the Andersons and implement new policies against harassment of residents. That weekend, our front yard filled with flowers, cards, and gifts from strangers who'd followed our story. Madison was thrilled by the fairy houses crafted by children from across the country, each one accompanied by notes of support. "Mommy, look! This fairy house has solar panels, and this one has a tiny wheelchair ramp, and this one is made from recycled materials." Children understood what adults had forgotten, that creativity comes in many forms, and judging differences only limits everyone's potential for joy. The criminal trial was scheduled for the following month, but the Andersons were already paying prices they hadn't anticipated. Margaret lost her part-time job at the local library after parents complained about her working around children. Frank's construction business lost 3 major contracts when clients learned about the harassment charges. Their house went up for sale on a Tuesday morning. The for sale sign appeared overnight, accompanied by a much smaller sign, "Motivated Sellers." Madison noticed it first. "Mommy, are they moving away?" "It looks like it, sweetheart." "Good. Maybe now other families with kids can move in, and we can have more friends to build fairy gardens with." The purity of her response, focusing on future friendships rather than past trauma, reminded me why protecting her childhood had been worth every battle, every legal fee, every sleepless night spent gathering evidence. The Andersons had tried to steal her innocence by weaponizing adult institutions against our family. Instead, they'd taught her that standing up for truth and love always wins in the end. Their moving truck arrived on Saturday morning, and as they packed their belongings under the watchful eyes of neighbors who no longer had to pretend to respect them, Madison worked in her fairy garden, adding finishing touches to the courthouse, where tiny wooden figures dispensed justice with kindness. "Mommy, look, I'm making a fairy law that says families can be different and still be perfect." "That sounds like a very wise law, sweetheart." The last thing they loaded was Margaret Anderson's surveillance equipment, telephoto lenses, tripods, and cameras that had documented months of fabricated evidence, equipment purchased specifically to build a case against a family whose only crime was refusing to conform. As the moving truck pulled away, neighbors gathered on lawns and sidewalks, not to say goodbye, but to witness the end of a chapter that had revealed the true character of people who'd lived among them. The house stood empty, the for sale signs swaying in the afternoon breeze, while Madison's fairy garden bloomed with new construction, including a welcome center for families who understood that love comes in many different forms. That evening, I received the call I'd been waiting for. District Attorney Morrison's voice carried satisfaction tempered with professional restraint. "Ella, Margaret Anderson accepted a plea bargain this afternoon. Guilty plea to harassment charges, 1-year probation, mandatory counseling, and restitution for your legal fees." "What about the false reporting charges?" "Guilty plea on those as well. She's banned from filing CPS complaints for 5 years unless she's a mandatory reporter in a professional capacity." "And Frank?" "Same terms. They want to avoid trial and the additional publicity that would bring." Justice served with a side of public accountability. The system they tried to abuse had ultimately held them responsible for their actions. Madison fell asleep that night surrounded by fairy houses sent from children from around the world, each one a testament to the creativity and acceptance she'd inspired simply by being herself.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.